It was the kind of night that makes you question everything. The kind of night that forces you to face truths you've spent years running from. I never expected it to come to this. Never imagined that one moment, one impulsive decision would unravel the entire story of my life. The phone in my hand felt like a foreign object, as if it didn't belong in my life anymore. I had lived so long without it, without him, that I almost forgot what it was like to reach out. But I had to. I had to reach out. I had just cheated. Not with some random man, but with a married one. A man who wasn't even mine. A man whose wife trusted him. A man whose life I had just torn apart in a matter of hours. And now, the weight of my actions was sinking in. How could I have done it? Why did I think it would feel different this time? I had always told myself that I would never become one of those women, the ones who cheated, who hurt others for their own selfish desires. Yet here I was, a product of my own choices. I had crossed a line that I could never erase, and all I could do now was face the consequences. But there was one thing I had been running from for years: the man I had once called my husband, the man I had abandoned, the man I hadn't spoken to in 7 long years. The one person who deserved answers from me. I didn't know why I decided to call him that night. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was desperation. But as I stared at the phone, my finger hovering over the call button, I realized that calling him was the only way to stop this spiral I was in. Maybe it was time to face everything. To finally confront the man I had left behind and see if there was any piece of us left. But how would he respond? What would he say after everything that had happened between us? 7 years without contact, 7 years of silence, 7 years of him waiting for me to come back or maybe forgetting about me completely. Would he even care that I was calling? Would he even want to hear my voice after everything I had done? I thought back to the last time we spoke, the last time I looked into his eyes and saw the love I had taken for granted. It feels like another lifetime now. Those days when we were happy, when we believed that love was all we needed to get through anything. We had both been so naive. The truth is, I didn't know how to love him anymore, and so I walked away. But that night, something shifted. The affair had opened up a floodgate of feelings I wasn't prepared to face. The guilt, the shame, the realization that I had thrown away the best thing I'd ever had. My husband, my partner, the man I had abandoned for no good reason. The decision to call him wasn't easy. It felt like the most impossible thing I had ever done. I had lived my life without him for so long, built a life in his absence. But I was no longer that person. Something inside of me had cracked. I had done something that could never be undone. I had hurt someone else, and I had to own it. I closed my eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and pressed the button. The phone rang. Once. Twice. 3 times. My heart was racing. I wanted to hang up. I almost did. But I couldn't. I had to know. I had to hear his voice. And then, he picked up. Hello? The sound of his voice hit me like a ton of bricks. I hadn't heard it in years, but it was still so familiar, so comforting. But it wasn't just comforting. It was painful. It was a reminder of everything I had lost, everything I had thrown away. I didn't know where to start. I didn't know how to explain myself, how to make him understand why I had done what I did. There was no excuse. I had no reason. And yet, there I was, calling him after all this time, after all the hurt. He didn't say anything. He just waited. Waited for me to speak. To say something. Anything. I could hear the silence on the other end, and it was deafening. It was the silence of a man who had been waiting for closure, for answers, for some kind of explanation. I didn't know what to say, but I knew I had to say something. I don't know where to start, I stammered, my words shaky. I don't even know why I'm calling. I made a mistake. He stayed silent. I cheated, I continued, barely able to get the words out. I cheated on you, and I've been living with that guilt. every day, every moment. And I can't keep running from it. I know I hurt you, I know I abandoned you, and I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you. I could hear his breath on the other side. But still, he didn't speak. His silence was like a wall between us, and in that silence, I felt the weight of all the years I had wasted, the years I had spent running from him, running from myself. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. Why now? His voice was calm, measured, but there was something else there. A hint of sadness, of resignation. He wasn't angry. He wasn't shouting at me. He was simply asking the question I had known he would ask. Why now? After 7 years of silence, why was I calling him now, after everything I had done? I don't know, I whispered. I don't know. I couldn't keep living with this. I couldn't keep running from it. There was a pause on the other end, and then he spoke again. His voice was softer this time. Do you really expect me to just forgive you? And there it was. The question I had been dreading. Would he forgive me? Could he forgive me? I didn't know. I didn't have an answer. But I knew one thing for sure. I had to try. I had to face him. I had to try to make things right, even if that meant facing the consequences of my actions. I don't expect anything, I said, my voice trembling. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know. I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. For everything. There was another long silence. I didn't know what he was thinking, what was going through his mind. I didn't know if he was going to hang up on me or if he would say the words I had been hoping for. I didn't know anything. And then he spoke again. Goodbye. And with that, the phone went silent. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. The call had ended. He had hung up. But it wasn't just the end of the call. It was the end of everything. It was the end of my past, the end of my marriage, the end of what could have been. And now, as I sat there, holding my phone, I knew one thing for sure. I had lost him, for good. The silence on the other end of the line was suffocating. I sat there motionless as the weight of what had just happened sank in. My fingers still clutched the phone. But it was as if I could no longer feel it. The reality of what I had just done hit me harder than anything else ever had. He had hung up. He had ended it with a simple word. Goodbye. And I had no more words left. I had been seeking redemption, a sliver of hope that maybe, just maybe, he would take me back, or at least understand. But instead, all I got was a final, heart-wrenching goodbye. I had wanted to fix things. I thought that calling him would be the first step toward healing, for both of us. I thought I could somehow take back the years of pain, the years of silence, the years of me running from the truth. But now I realized that nothing could undo the damage I had done. No apology, no tearful confession, no desperate phone call could ever take away the fact that I had betrayed him. My mind raced. What if I had said something else? What if I had apologized sooner, before everything fell apart? Could things have been different? Could I have stopped myself from making such a terrible mistake? The what-ifs were endless, but none of them mattered. The truth was simple. I had done the one thing that could destroy everything we had. I had cheated, and now everything was gone. I threw the phone on the couch beside me, feeling an overwhelming sense of emptiness fill the room. It wasn't just the silence from the call, it was the emptiness in my heart. The feeling that no matter how many times I tried to justify my actions, I would never be able to fill that void. The guilt gnawed at me, making it hard to breathe. I could hear his voice again. The calm, distant tone when he said, "Goodbye." It wasn't angry. It wasn't hurtful. It wasn't filled with resentment or malice. It was just final. And in that finality, I understood something. He was done with me. He had moved on. But could I? Could I move on from this? Could I live with the weight of what I had done? How could I? How could I keep pretending that everything was okay when deep down I knew it wasn't? How could I keep living in the lie I had built around myself? I thought about him, the man I had cheated with. What was he thinking now? Was he even feeling any of the guilt I was drowning in? Probably not. For him, this was just another affair, another moment of fleeting excitement. But for me, it was everything. It was the moment that shattered my entire life, the moment that tore apart everything I had once held dear. I was lying to myself if I thought I could somehow find peace after this. How could I? How could I find any kind of solace when I had broken the most sacred thing in my life, the trust of the man who had loved me? I picked up my phone again, my hands shaking as I stared at the screen. There was no point in calling him again. There was no point in begging for a second chance. I had already destroyed any chance of reconciliation. But in the quiet, I realized that I needed to do something to stop the spiral I was in. I closed my eyes and thought back to the time before everything went wrong. Before I had felt the emptiness that pushed me into the arms of someone else. Before I had walked away from the love that had been right in front of me. There was a time when my husband and I were happy, when we shared dreams, when we built a life together. How had I forgotten that? How had I let it all slip away for something that wasn't even real? I felt tears start to well up in my eyes as I remembered him. His laugh, his smile, the way he used to hold me after a long day and tell me everything would be okay. It felt like a different life now. But it wasn't just the memory of him that hurt. It was the realization that I had never fully appreciated it when I had it. I had taken him for granted, believing I could always return to that love. But I couldn't. That love was gone. I had thrown it away. And then, a thought crossed my mind that almost stopped me in my tracks. What if it was too late? What if everything I had done, every step I took to try to fix things was all in vain? What if he had already moved on, found peace without me, and now was happier than he ever was with me? What if he never wanted to hear from me again? The reality was painful, but I had to face it. The truth hit me hard in that moment. I was alone. Completely and utterly alone. I had pushed him away. I had chosen a path that led to nothing but pain and regret, and now I had to live with the consequences of that decision. I sat there in silence, letting the tears fall freely. It wasn't just for him. It wasn't just for what I had lost. It was for me, too. I had lost myself in the process of trying to find something that wasn't mine to take. I had betrayed my own values, my own sense of integrity, and now I was left with nothing. But maybe that's what it takes sometimes, to lose everything before you realize what truly matters. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out into the night. The world outside was quiet, still, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace settle in my chest. It wasn't the peace I had hoped for, but it was a start. I didn't know what the future held, and I didn't know if there would ever be a place for me in his life again. But one thing was certain: I couldn't keep running from myself. The journey ahead would be painful, it would be difficult, but it was the only path I had left. I had to find a way to live with the mistakes I had made, and learn to forgive myself before I could even begin to seek forgiveness from him.